It started with a letter taped to the front door. Just a flimsy white envelope with the emblem of the local homeowners association printed in the corner, and the word urgent stamped in red. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a routine notice, a misplaced trash bin, a late fee, some trivial reminder about lawn height. But to the man who lived there, it felt different. There was something too precise about the timing, too sharp in tone. And so, without knowing exactly why, he opened it slowly, with the kind of caution he hadn't used since he was overseas. The letter claimed a violation, an expired permit for a perimeter fence that had stood unchanged for more than a decade. It cited a section of municipal code he'd never heard of, and it warned of escalating fines if the matter wasn't resolved immediately. On the surface, it was laughable. The fence had been built in 2012 with city approval. The documents were still in a file cabinet in his office, organized like everything else in his life had been since he left the military. But when he called the HOA office to challenge the claim, he was met with a robotic explanation and an insistence that repermitting was now required under updated safety review guidelines. He'd dealt with bureaucracy before. He'd waited in line for hours to process paperwork that could have been done in 10 minutes. He knew how to navigate systems meant to exhaust you. But something about this felt different. There was an edge beneath the politeness, a rehearsed coldness that unsettled him. As if the person on the other end of the line wasn't really working from a script, they were the script. That night, as he sat on the porch with his dog Reaper at his feet, the weight of something unseen pressed on his chest. Reaper, a Belgian Malinois trained in military defense and scent detection, was as alert and loyal as ever. But even he had been acting strange lately, his ears pricking toward the woods behind the house, his gaze locked at something just beyond human perception. On a hunch, the veteran walked the property line with a flashlight and his dog in tow. He circled the fence, found nothing, then stopped when Reaper suddenly began pawing at the soil near one of the posts. Buried just beneath the surface was a small, black circular object no larger than a silver dollar. It had no branding, no instructions, just a smooth, polished surface and faint seams. He recognized it immediately. A tracker. He didn't panic. He didn't call the police. Instead, he documented it, photographed, bagged it, logged the GPS coordinates, and stored it in a lockbox. Then he began setting up cameras, infrared, motion sensitive, wired directly to a private off-grid server. He wasn't afraid. He'd seen worse. But he was wide awake now. Over the next week, the signs multiplied. A white panel van idled near the corner stop sign for 2 nights in a row, headlights off. A small drone buzzed over the backyard fence and vanished into the trees before Reaper could reach it. There were new notices taped to the front door, citing fresh violations. Non-compliant vegetation, unauthorized structure height, excess storage of utility materials. All nonsense. All piling up. Then came the visits. Not from local officials, but from men dressed in matching khaki uniforms with no agency insignia. They claimed to be inspectors, showed vague paperwork with blacked-out sections, and ignored requests for identification. And always, behind them, there was the name Harland Acquisitions. He didn't recognize it at first. But after digging through property databases and cross-referencing zoning changes, he found it listed in the land redevelopment annexes, quietly attached to a cluster of entities bidding on property, recovery, contracts around the county. Its name showed up in council minutes, always as a private consultant, never a bidder. And when he followed the threads online, things got stranger. Harland wasn't just a land acquisition firm. It was a shell company with documented ties to federal contractors, defense technology programs, and reclassified infrastructure projects. In short, it was a ghost, doing the kind of work that didn't show up on public records until years after it was done, and they were targeting him. He understood the motive soon after. Through an online veterans forum, he connected with a former geospatial analyst who helped him decode survey maps of his area. The land his property sat on was marked in 2004 as part of a Phase 2 infrastructure corridor, then reflagged in 2013 as a potential geothermal zone. But the most chilling term was buried in a memo from 2017, a classified DARPA project labeled Site Echo. According to the analyst, that code had only been used a handful of times, and always around locations of suspected energy anomalies beneath the earth. This wasn't about fences or zoning or landscaping. It was about what lay beneath. They wanted the land, and they couldn't ask nicely. So they came with ordinances. They came with cameras. They came with neighbors pretending to care and laws dressed like community values. But the veteran had spent his life preparing for harder fights. He turned his home into a fortress, not with bricks and barbed wire, but with knowledge. He mapped every surveillance blind spot, modified his trail cams with night vision overlays, and trained Reaper to respond to specific frequencies. He converted his workshop into a digital command center. He taught himself to monitor encrypted signals. And most importantly, he began to record everything, every letter, every encounter, every sound outside after midnight. He didn't retaliate. He exposed. Through a private live stream, he began sharing his story. No names at first. Just facts. Timelines. Video evidence. Audio files. Viewers came slowly, then in waves. Some were curious. Others had stories of their own. Before long, the channel had thousands of followers, veterans, activists, legal experts, landowners. He hadn't just gone public. He had gone tactical. The pushback was immediate. The HOA began holding closed emergency sessions, where residents were not allowed. Anonymous calls were made to animal control accusing him of weaponizing his dog. Someone filed a complaint with the city alleging he was storing illegal materials in his garage. A child services worker even knocked on his door one morning asking about children that didn't exist. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to exhaust him. But exhaustion was a weapon he'd already trained to endure. And then, they crossed a line point one night. 4 men in tactical gear, body armor, masks, radio comms, breached his back fence. They moved like professionals, too clean to be vandals, too calculated to be drunk kids. But they weren't ready for what they found. Reaper met them first, a silent blur from the shadows, forcing them to scatter. The veteran flipped the switch on his homemade strobe deterrents, blinding flashes paired with sonic emitters calibrated to disrupt equilibrium. He stepped into the yard unarmed but commanding, voice amplified through a speaker he'd set up just for this moment. Every camera streamed in real time. Every move was broadcast, and just like that, the 4 intruders disappeared into the trees, never to be identified. The video went viral overnight. The next morning, a local journalist reached out. Then a regional radio station. Then a state representative's office. The story was out. The real one. Not the version written in HOA minutes, or whispered in community Facebook groups. But the truth. A decorated veteran defending his home from a collusion of private interests and silent government partners using policy as a weapon. Still, it wasn't over. Because even when the narrative changes, the machine doesn't stop. The veteran had no illusions about safety, not even after the media attention. If anything, he knew visibility was both armor and target. As soon as the spotlight dimmed, they'd come at him in ways that wouldn't make headlines. No more nighttime break-ins. No more overt surveillance. It would be quieter now. Legal motions, character attacks, procedural traps laid in daylight. He could already feel the shape of their new tactics before they were written. Within days, he received a certified letter informing him of a pending lien on the property. It claimed unpaid assessments and code violation fines totaling over $30,000. The figure was absurd, but that wasn't the point. They were laying groundwork, an artificial paper trail they could later present to justify foreclosure or forced auction. He scanned the documents into his server, annotated the inconsistencies, and prepared a response. He knew the rules of engagement had shifted again. Worse than the lien was the betrayal that followed. A neighbor he had shared barbecues with, someone whose kids used to play catch in his backyard, filed a sworn affidavit with the HOA claiming the veteran had made implied threats during a neighborhood meeting. The language was vague and legalistic, obviously crafted by someone else, but the signature was real. When he confronted the man, there was no fight, only shame. The neighbor couldn't look him in the eye. "They said they'd take my house too," he mumbled. That was all. He walked away with a kind of cold understanding. This wasn't about individual malice. It was systemic coercion. They weren't just going after him, they were isolating him. Making an example. Sending a message to everyone else. Resistance is contagious, and it must be quarantined. He returned to his perimeter defense. Recalibrated cameras. Reinforced signal jammers. Upgraded his drone jammer frequency. Reaper never left his side. The dog had begun acting with an eerie sense of intuition, as if sensing human motives long before they translated into movement. He'd saved the veteran more than once now. He wasn't just an animal anymore. He was the line point one night. Reaper growled low and steady, the way he used to before raids. The veteran grabbed his flashlight, his pistol, and stepped out into the dark. There was no movement at first. But then, a flicker, an IR signature, barely visible, behind the tree line. He didn't pursue. Instead, he retreated to his server, accessed his feed, and triangulated the signal. What he discovered made him go still. The signature wasn't human. It was mechanical, bipedal, heat-emitting, with movement patterns too consistent for any living thing. It had been pacing his fence line for 2 nights, mapped in intervals, and matched a blueprint he'd only ever seen once, years ago, in a DARPA field manual about autonomous ground scouts. Whatever was under his land, they weren't just protecting it. They were already scanning it. He reached out to a friend, a retired field engineer turned whistleblower, who confirmed the design. "That's experimental," the man whispered over a scrambled line. "It's not supposed to be deployed on domestic soil." But here it was, walking the edge of his property like it had a map. It didn't matter whether it was piloted or programmed. Its presence confirmed the fear he hadn't dared name. He was on top of something bigger than corporate greed. Bigger than HOA tyranny. This was national-level interest cloaked in plausible deniability. Then came the email. Encrypted. No sender. No trace. Just a file and a line of text. "You are interfering with classified operations. Disengage or face federal consequences." That was the moment everything sharpened. Because it wasn't just pressure now, it was threat of annihilation. He took the file, decrypted it, and opened a set of schematics labeled Echo Tier 3, Subterranean Relay Node Testing Site, Authorization Restricted. The coordinates pointed directly to his property. Not near it. Not adjacent. His exact GPS square. The relay node referred to a buried device, part of an experimental communication grid that used geological formations to transmit low-frequency signals through the Earth. It was a prototype. Unstable. And unpermitted. In other words, they had buried technology on his land without consent, without disclosure, and now wanted the legal cover to take it back. The truth landed heavy in his chest. His land was never about zoning, or goats, or fences. It was a test bed. A tool. And his refusal to move made him the final variable in an experiment they couldn't afford to let run uncontrolled. But they underestimated one thing. He had no intention of moving. He went back to work. The live stream evolved into a full investigative platform. He opened his server to a network of ex-intelligence personnel, legal experts, and independent journalists. Together, they dug up procurement contracts, shell company overlaps, and leaked memos buried in redacted files. The pattern became clear. Harlan Acquisitions was the civilian front. DARPA and a defense contractor known only by acronym, IDIUM, were the back end. The HOA was the glove. Public support exploded. The story broke containment. People saw in his struggle a mirror of their own, how the systems meant to protect communities could be hijacked by hidden interests. How language, law, and policy could be weaponized against anyone standing in the way of profit or progress. The veteran wasn't just a homeowner anymore. He was a firewall. The final escalation came in the form of a court order, delivered by a U.S. Marshal, demanding temporary access to the property for emergency geological stabilization. It was the legal equivalent of kicking in the front door without ever calling it a raid. He was given 72 hours to comply. He did not. Instead, he hosted a live-stream press conference from his porch. Wearing his uniform jacket and holding up the original deed to the land, he read aloud the constitutional protections of private property and declared the order invalid under current state law. Legal experts watching confirmed it. The order was misfiled, jurisdictionally flawed, and based on fraudulent claims of public safety risk. Then he revealed the documents, the schematics, the tracker data, the footage of the 4 intruders, the thermal scans of the autonomous unit, the leaked contractor memos, and the digital fingerprints tying Harlan acquisitions to federal defense budgets. The stream was watched by over 400,000 people in real time. By the next morning, 3 of the HOA board members had resigned. The court order was rescinded, and the county issued a statement saying it had opened an investigation into improper contracting procedures. It wasn't the end, but it was enough to make them pause. The following week was quiet. In O letters. No vehicles. No motion at the fence line. Just Reaper, watching the woods. Peace, when it finally came, wasn't triumphant. It wasn't marked by celebration or relief. It arrived as an eerie stillness, a quiet that crept in slowly, like fog over a battlefield. No more unmarked SUVs idling just out of sight. No strange men walking the perimeter under the guise of utility inspections. No more cold stares from neighbors, who used to smile, but had become informants for a cause they barely understood. The silence wasn't comforting, not at first. For a long time, it just felt like a tactical pause. The veteran didn't relax. He recalibrated. Years of military training had drilled one truth deep into his bones. True peace is never declared. It's monitored. It's maintained. It's earned, over and over again. So he didn't dismantle the motion sensors hidden in the shrubs. He didn't disable the layered camera system, or the hardened local server that captured every inch of his property. He added to it. The software got smarter, the firewalls stronger. The routines became rituals. Reaper, too, stayed sharp. The dog slept with one ear always cocked toward the front door. If a leaf crunched where it shouldn't have, Reaper was up, muscles tensed, eyes laser-focused on the dark. They were a team still. But now their missions were defensive, not offensive. The perimeter wasn't just their physical space anymore. It was symbolic. It was a line in the sand, not just for them, but for everyone watching. And people were watching. The live stream had changed everything. At first, it was just a handful of viewers, curious folks, veterans from old units, a few activists interested in HOA overreach. But it grew. Clips were shared, broken down frame by frame, dissected by legal analysts, technologists, even conspiracy theorists. What began as a neighborhood dispute had turned into something bigger, a cautionary tale, a playbook, a warning. He started getting letters. Not emails, actual letters, handwritten, from people who didn't trust digital communication. Some were heartfelt thank yous. Others were pleas for help. A woman in Arizona described her HOA fining her for unapproved landscaping, then receiving anonymous offers to buy her house at half its value. A family in Ohio was being cited for decorative obstructions after their child's wheelchair ramp was installed. A disabled veteran in Texas said a contractor threatened him with condemnation paperwork after he refused to sell. Every story sounded familiar. Different details, same blueprint. The same legal loopholes exploited. The same pressure applied. The same feeling of being slowly, deliberately, surrounded. So he began to respond. Not with legal advice, he wasn't a lawyer, but with strategy, structure, perspective. He showed them how to gather evidence. How to set up passive surveillance legally. How to document everything. How to stay calm when the knock came at the door. He never promised victory. But he offered something rarer, clarity. And solidarity. He created encrypted guides, and sent them out under burner emails. Step-by-step breakdowns of what he'd done, what had worked, and what hadn't. He called it Operation Homefront. It was underground, grassroots, and utterly decentralized. No leaders. Just information. Empowerment. A shared resistance born from necessity, not ideology. Reaper would watch him during those late nights at the desk, the glow of the monitor painting shadows across his face. The dog never needed to understand the content. He understood the mood, the need, the purpose. And he was always ready. The land around the house began to heal slowly. The garden, once trampled during a nighttime contractor incursion, bloomed again. Fruit trees bore quietly. Wild grass took back the scarred patches where utility vehicles had tried to dig. But not everything grew back. Some scars stayed visible. The fence post where he found the first tracker remained charred from when he pulled it out and torched it on camera. He left it that way. A marker. A boundary. Every now and then, he'd notice a vehicle pause just a moment too long outside the property. He didn't panic. He took a picture. Logged it. Drones made occasional flyovers. He assumed they were from nearby developers or bored federal contractors. He kept notes. He didn't reach for a weapon anymore. He didn't need to. The real weapon was exposure. He'd built a wall of facts, data, timestamps, and visuals that would make anyone think twice about poking that hornet's nest again. Local law enforcement shifted their stance too. After the town hall disaster that exposed the HOA's collusion with Harlan Acquisitions and their contractors, there was a quiet reckoning. A few deputies retired early. One moved out of state. The sheriff himself came by one afternoon, unannounced. No patrol car. Just a pickup truck and a six-pack of iced tea. They sat on the porch. Reaper curled under the man's legs, and the sheriff talked. Apologies weren't spoken directly, but they hung in the air like smoke. Mutual understanding passed between them in the gaps between words. The new HOA formed 6 months later. This one was made up of actual residents, retirees, A schoolteacher, a pair of parents whose teenage son had been scared half to death when contractors in black gear swarmed his cul-de-sac. They were real people. Reluctant leaders. They asked the veteran to join, even offered him the chair position. He declined. Instead, he mailed in a handwritten note with his dues payment. Just 4 words. Leave people alone. Please. It was all he ever wanted. Not control. Not revenge. Just peace. Peace with his land. Peace with the woods beyond his garden. Peace inside the walls of a house that had seen too much. But inside, he knew something had changed forever. You don't go through a siege, especially one backed by quiet billion-dollar interests and cloaked in legalese, and walk away unchanged. He wasn't broken. He'd seen broken before, in battlefields and barracks. He was reconfigured. Tuned. Like an old radio finally dialed to the right frequency. He saw the game now. The way corporate interests hid behind community associations. The way federal contracts found backdoors through local zoning ordinances. The way neighbors could be turned into surveillance assets with nothing more than a clipboard and a vague warning about compliance issues. He started cataloging everything. Not just his story. Everyone's. He built a network of people like him. Homeowners, veterans, whistleblowers, disillusioned code enforcers, even a couple of retired intelligence officers. Some used aliases. Most didn't. They shared footage, scanned documents, strange letters from shell corporations offering to relieve ownership burdens. He stored it all on encrypted drives, shared across cloud dead drops and mail thumb drives. His files grew. So did his sense of purpose. Reaper aged a bit that year. The gray in his muzzle became more pronounced. His gait slowed, but only slightly. He still ran perimeter sweeps every morning, ears sharp, eyes alert. He didn't whine unless something mattered. When kids from the neighborhood came by to say hello, Reaper let them pet him. He seemed to know they weren't the enemy. Not anymore. The veteran began to plant trees, fruit-bearing, fast-growing, with roots that would outlast fences and bylaws and HOAs. He taught himself soil balancing, hydroponics, and basic off-grid power systems. His land had taught him something the military never did, how to live not just defensively, but deliberately. He even started speaking anonymously on podcasts under the alias Delta Ridge. Just a voice, no face, telling his story and others like it. He warned of the intersection between federal research and private land acquisition, of technologies hidden under soil surveys, of gaslight tactics disguised as neighborly concern. Some didn't believe him. That was fine. The ones who needed to did. One day, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single flash drive, wrapped in black tape. He scanned it for malware. Clear. Opened it. Dozens of satellite images. Markings. Coordinates. Audio files labeled with dates and initials he didn't recognize. At the bottom of the folder, a single note. You were right. It's not just you. He sat with that for a long time, not because it scared him, but because it confirmed everything. The fence permit. The contractors. The unmarked vehicles. The anomaly. All of it had been part of something bigger. He'd just been the first to say no. To fight back. To win. For now, at least, the anomaly beneath his land remained untouched. Still classified. Still monitored, he assumed. But it had become too risky. Public. Messy. The powers behind it would move on, find an easier mark. A quieter place. But that didn't mean the fight was over. Just relocated. He kept preparing. Kept building, not out of paranoia, but out of principle, because in America, land is more than dirt. It's memory. Identity. Struggle. Sacrifice. He'd fought for land on foreign soil, lost friends for it, buried pieces of himself in places whose names no one could pronounce. And now, here in his backyard, the battle had come again. Different tools. Different language. Same stakes. He and Reaper walked the tree line every evening. Not because they expected trouble, but because vigilance was now part of peace. It wasn't fear. It was discipline. And respect. Sometimes he would stop and look out over the property, the sun casting long shadows over the grass. He'd breathe in deeply, the smell of pine and clay and wood smoke grounding him. He'd run a hand along Reaper's back. And in those moments, he felt something real. Not happiness, exactly. But rightness. This was his home. Not just because his name was on a deed, but because he defended it, because he earned it, because he wasn't alone anymore.